Look at that plant. That is a single bush bean, and I just picked over 40 full pods off of it this morning. Not stringy, not tough, not half-eaten by bugs. Just perfect, crisp, snap-clean pods that break with that sound. You know the one, that bright green crack that tells you the bean is exactly at its peak. And 5 feet away from it, I have another row that gave me maybe 6 pods total, and every one of them looked like something had been chewing on it overnight. Same soil, same sun, same seed packet, same me, same everything. So what happened? What turned one into a machine and the other into a disaster? I used to think it was luck. Some years you just get a good crop, some years you don't. That is what I told myself for almost a decade. I would stand out there in August, looking at a row of yellowing, spotty plants with maybe 3 sad little beans hanging off them, and I would shrug and say, well, it was a weird season, too wet, too dry, too something, and I would try again next year. And then I finally admitted something I should have admitted years earlier. I was making the same 5 mistakes, year after year, and I didn't even know they were mistakes until I stopped making them. Today I am going to walk you through every single one of those mistakes, because if you are growing beans and you are getting anything less than an armload of pods per plant, one of these is almost certainly the reason. And the thing that honestly kind of annoys me about these 5 mistakes is that they are not complicated. They are not secrets that require a degree in botany or a greenhouse that costs more than your car or some imported soil amendment you have to order from a specialty catalog. They are simple, almost boring things that old gardeners have known for generations, but nobody bothers to tell you when you are starting out. You get handed a seed packet, you read the back, you follow the instructions, and you end up with spindly little plants that give you a handful of beans and then give up. And the reason you probably haven't heard about these mistakes before is the same reason I didn't hear about them for years. They are too simple to sell. Nobody makes money telling you to stop watering your beans at the wrong time of day. Nobody can package and market the advice to just leave your soil alone and stop digging. Nobody runs ads saying, hey, pick your beans 2 days earlier and you'll double your harvest, because there is no product at the end of that sentence. So these things get lost, passed down from neighbor to neighbor, from old gardening books that are out of print, from quiet conversations over a fence that happen once and then never again. And I want to pull them back out into the open, right now, in one place, so you don't have to spend 10 years learning them the hard way like I did. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. You have grown beans before. You planted them, you watered them, you got some beans. It was fine. What could possibly be so dramatic about 5 mistakes? I completely understand that reaction. I had the same one right up until the season I fixed all 5 of these at once, and my bean harvest tripled. Tripled. Not doubled, tripled. Same garden bed. Same seeds. Same weather, same pest, same everything. And the only difference was that I stopped doing the things I am about to tell you to stop doing. So if you are even slightly skeptical, I get it. I would be too. Just hear me out. Because if you are making even 2 of these mistakes, you are leaving half your harvest on the table without realizing it. And the first one is the mistake I made for the longest time, and it is also the one that sounds the most wrong when you first hear it. It goes against everything you have ever been told about gardening. Do not overprepare your soil for beans. I know. Everything you have ever read about gardening tells you to dig deep, add compost, add fertilizer, fluff everything up, make that soil as rich and dark and crumbly and perfect as possible before you even think about putting a seed in the ground. You want that soil to look like chocolate cake, right? That is the goal everyone tells you to aim for. And for most vegetables, that is exactly right. Tomatoes will love you for it. They will sink their roots into that rich soil and grow into monsters. Squash will sprawl across it like it owns the place, sending out leaves the size of umbrellas. Peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, they all thrive on that kind of treatment. But beans are not most vegetables. Beans are legumes, which means they have a superpower that most other garden plants do not. They make their own nitrogen. Their roots form a partnership with bacteria in the soil called rhizobia, and those bacteria actually pull nitrogen out of the air, right out of the atmosphere, and convert it into a form the plant can use. It is one of the oldest and most elegant partnerships in nature, a relationship that has been going on for millions of years. And if you dump a bunch of nitrogen-rich compost or fertilizer into the soil before you plant, you are essentially telling the bean plant not to bother. The plant senses all that free nitrogen sitting there in the soil, all that easy food, and it decides, why would I waste energy feeding these bacteria and building these little nitrogen-fixing nodules on my roots when I can just slurp up the free stuff? And so it does. It grows big, lush green leaves. It looks gorgeous. You walk out to your garden and you see these massive, healthy bean plants, leaves dark green and shiny, stems thick, the whole plant just bursting with vigor, and you think you have done everything right. You pat yourself on the back. And then the flowers come, delicate little white or purple blossoms, and then they fall off. Just drop right onto the soil without ever forming a pod. And the pods that do form are small and sparse and kind of sad-looking, because all the plant's energy went into leaves, not into reproduction. It is like feeding a teenager nothing but sugar and then being surprised they don't want to do their homework. You get a lot of energy, but it is pointed in exactly the wrong direction. The plant is having a great time, but it is not doing the job you hired it to do. I learned this one from an older gardener in my community garden plot, a woman named Mrs. Chen, who had been growing beans in the same soil for 20 years and never once added fertilizer. Her plot was right next to mine, and every year I would watch her harvest basket after basket of beans while I stood there with my lush, beautiful, unproductive plants and fumed. Her plants were not tall and showy. They were compact, a little pale in the leaf compared to mine, almost yellowish and absolutely loaded with pods. I mean, you could barely see the leaves for all the beans hanging off them. I asked her what her secret was, and she just shrugged and said she didn't baby them. She put the seed in the ground and got out of the way. That was the whole secret. She didn't dig and compost. She didn't add fertilizer. She didn't even really weed that aggressively. She just planted and waited. And for years I thought she was just lucky, or she had some magic soil, or she was doing something she wasn't telling me. But no, she was doing less, and that was the whole point. So here is what you actually do. When you are preparing a bed for beans, do not add nitrogen-rich amendments. No fresh manure, no high nitrogen fertilizer, no compost that hasn't finished breaking down. If you absolutely must add something, add a little bit of phosphorus and potassium, something that supports root growth and fruiting rather than leaf growth. Bone meal, wood ash, something like that. Better yet, add nothing at all unless you know your soil is genuinely depleted. Beans are forgiving. They will grow in soil that would make a tomato plant weep. I have grown beans in heavy clay, in sandy soil, in soil that was basically just broken down bark mulch, and they produced just fine as long as I didn't smother them with nitrogen. And if you want to give them the best start possible without ruining your harvest, you can do one simple thing. Get some inoculant. It is a powder, costs maybe $5 or $6 at any garden store or online, and it contains billions of those rhizobia bacteria I mentioned. You dampen your seeds, you sprinkle the powder on, you plant them, and you have just given your beans the partner they need to feed themselves. That is the only product I will ever recommend for beans, and it costs less than a single coffee from a vending machine. And it lasts for years in the package, so one purchase will cover multiple seasons. Now let me tell you about the second mistake, and this one is going to sound just as wrong as the first one, maybe even more so. You are probably watering your beans at the wrong time of day. And I don't just mean morning versus evening, although that matters too. I mean you are watering them in a way that leaves the leaves wet for too long. Beans are absolute magnets for fungal diseases. Anthracnose, rust, powdery mildew, bacterial blight, you name it. If there is a fungus or a bacteria that can attack a bean leaf, it will find your garden and it will move in, and once it does, your plants are going to struggle. The leaves get brown spots, then they turn yellow, then they develop these rusty orange pustules on the underside, then they curl up and fall off, and a plant without leaves is not making many beans. It is trying to survive, not produce. The thing that took me years to understand is that fungal spores need water on the leaf surface to germinate. It doesn't matter how many spores are floating around in the air. If the leaf is dry, they can't get a foothold. They land and they just sit there, inert, harmless. The moment you give them a wet leaf that stays wet for hours, you have opened the door. You have given them exactly the environment they need to wake up and start growing into the leaf tissue. So when you water your beans from above with a sprinkler or a hose nozzle, spraying water all over the leaves, especially in the evening when the sun is going down, and that water is going to sit there all night in the cool darkness, you are basically sending out an engraved invitation to every fungus in the neighborhood. You are rolling out the red carpet. I used to water my entire garden in the evening after work. It was my routine. Get home, change clothes, go out and water everything for half an hour while I unwound from the day. The sun was low, the air was cooling, it was pleasant. And every single year, by mid-July, my bean leaves looked like someone had flicked brown paint all over them. First a few spots, then more, then the leaves started yellowing from the bottom up, and by August the plants looked like they were dying. I tried spraying fungicides. I tried picking off the worst leaves. Nothing worked, because I was fixing the symptom and feeding the cause at the same time. It was like trying to bail out a boat while you are still drilling holes in the bottom. I would spray a fungicide, the leaves would dry, and then I would go out that evening and soak them all over again. The fungus never went away because I never stopped giving it what it needed. Here is what you do instead. Water your beans at soil level. Use a drip hose, a soaker hose, or just a regular hose with the nozzle turned down low, and direct the water right at the base of the plant. Get the soil wet, not the leaves. And do it in the morning. If you water in the morning, any water that does accidentally splash onto the leaves will evaporate quickly as the sun comes up and the air warms. The leaves stay dry through the night, which is when fungal spores are most active, and your plants get the water they need without the disease they don't. If you have ever noticed that your beans look great in June, lush and green and full of promise, and then fall apart in July and August, watering the leaves is probably why. Fix this one thing, and you will be shocked at how much longer your plants stay healthy. I have had bean plants stay green and productive well into September after I switched to soil-level watering, while my neighbor's plants were brown sticks by the first week of August. The third mistake is the one that gets me every time I see it in someone else's garden, because I made it for so long myself, and it is so easy to fix and so tempting to ignore. Planting your beans too close together. The seed packet will tell you to space bush beans about 4 inches apart, and pole beans maybe 6. And if you are like me, you will look at that little seed, look at that big empty garden bed and think, that cannot possibly be right. That is so much wasted space. I can fit way more than that. Look at all that bare soil just sitting there. I could double my plants, double my harvest. And so you crowd them. You plant every 2 inches, or you just scatter a whole row and thin them a little bit, or you figure 3 inches is close enough, and for the first few weeks everything looks fine. The seedlings come up. They are green and cute, little pairs of heart-shaped leaves unfurling in the sun, and you feel very clever for maximizing your space. And then the plants start to grow, and suddenly they are touching, and then they are overlapping, and then they are one solid mass of leaves with no air moving through them at all. And you know what loves a solid mass of leaves with no air movement? Fungus, pests, the exact problems you are trying to avoid by watering properly will still find you if your plants are so crowded that the leaves can't dry out even when you water at the base. The humidity gets trapped in that dense canopy, and it creates a little microclimate that is perfect for disease. And beyond the disease issue, crowded beans are just stressed beans. They are competing for light, competing for water, competing for whatever nutrients are in the soil. Each plant is trying to outgrow its neighbor, stretching tall and spindly instead of bushing out and setting pods. Stressed plants do not produce well. They put out a few pods to try to reproduce before they die, and then they give up. I had a year where I planted 2 rows of bush beans, same variety, same soil, same watering. One row I spaced properly at 4 inches. The other row I crammed them in at about 1.5 inches apart, because I was sure I was being clever. The crowded row produced less than half what the spaced row did, and half of those beans were misshapen and tough, because the plants were too stressed to fill out the pods properly. They were curved and lumpy, and the seeds inside were uneven. I was not doubling my harvest by doubling my plants. I was cutting it in half. I had done twice the work for half the food. Give your beans room to breathe. 4 inches for bush beans, 6 for pole beans, and if you are growing pole beans on a trellis, make sure the trellis is open enough that air can move through the whole structure. A solid wall of bean vines looks impressive from a distance, but it is a disease factory waiting to happen. Use a trellis with gaps like cattle panel or string, not a solid fence. The fourth mistake is one that almost nobody talks about, and it is the reason I see so many gardeners give up on beans entirely. Harvesting too late. I know that sounds like a small thing. How much difference can a few days make? Let me tell you. The difference between a tender, sweet, snap bean that you can eat raw right off the plant and a tough, stringy, fibrous pod that tastes like you are chewing on dental floss is sometimes as little as 48 hours. Beans are not like tomatoes, where you can leave them on the vine an extra week and they just get sweeter and deeper in flavor. Beans are on a mission. Their entire biological purpose is to take the energy from those seeds inside the pod and turn it into a viable next generation. The moment the seeds inside the pod start to swell and mature, the plant shifts its resources. It stops putting energy into making the pod walls tender and sweet, and it starts pumping everything into those developing seeds. The pod walls get tough and fibrous. The sugars convert to starch. The texture goes from crisp to leathery. And if you leave the pods on the plant long enough for the seeds to fully mature, the plant will actually stop producing new flowers altogether. It gets a hormonal signal that says, mission accomplished, seeds are done, season over, time to die. And it shuts down. This is the trap I fell into for years. I would see a bunch of beans that were almost ready, and I would think, I'll give them one more day to get a little bigger. Just one more day. They're so close. And then one more day would become 3, because life gets busy, and I would go out to harvest and find pods that were bulging with seeds and tough as leather. And the plant would have stopped flowering, so there were no new beans coming. I had traded a steady supply of perfect beans for a single harvest of overgrown ones. The fix is almost too simple. Pick your beans early and pick them often. When the pods are about the thickness of a pencil and the seeds inside are still small and barely visible as bumps, that is the moment. Don't wait for them to get bigger. Pick them, and then come back 2 days later and pick again. And 2 days after that again. The more you pick, the more the plant produces, because you are preventing it from ever reaching that signal that says the seeds are mature and the season is done. It will keep flowering and keep producing, sometimes for weeks longer than a plant that was allowed to mature even a single pod. I have had bush beans produce for over a month when I stayed on top of the picking. The same variety, left alone, was done in 2 weeks. That is not a small difference. That is the difference between beans as a side dish, once or twice, and beans as a staple you are giving away to neighbors because you cannot keep up. I was bringing bags of beans to work because my family couldn't eat them fast enough. The fifth and final mistake is the one that I think hurts the most because it is so invisible. You can't see it happening. You just see the results, or rather you don't see the results because your plants look fine but they just are not producing the way they should. And that mistake is ignoring the soil temperature when you plant. Beans are warm weather crops. Their seeds will rot in cold, wet soil faster than almost anything else in your garden. You can put a pea seed in the ground in March when the soil is still chilly and damp, and it will sit there patiently and sprout when it is ready. A bean seed will not do that. A bean seed in cold soil will just die. It will absorb water, swell up, and then rot before it ever has a chance to send out a root. The seed coat will split, the embryo will start to wake up, and then the cold and the damp will kill it before it can get established. I learned this the hard way in my 3rd year of gardening. I had a warm spell in early April, a week of sunshine and temperatures in the 70s, and I thought, great, spring is here, time to plant beans. I was so excited. I had been waiting all winter. I put in 2 full rows of bush beans, carefully spaced, carefully labeled, and felt very ahead of the game. And then the weather turned cold again, which it always does in April, and it rained for a week. A cold, steady, miserable rain, and the soil temperature dropped back down into the 40s. Not a single one of those seeds sprouted. 3 weeks later, I dug around in the soil and found them, mushy and black and completely dead. They had just dissolved. I had to replant the whole crop, and by the time those second seeds came up, I had lost almost a month of growing season. That is a month of harvest I simply never got back. I was picking beans in September when I should have been picking them in July. The soil temperature for beans needs to be at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and ideally closer to 70. Not the air temperature, the soil temperature. You can have a beautiful sunny day in the mid-70s and still have soil that is too cold because it takes the ground much longer to warm up than the air. The sun heats the air in hours. It heats the soil over days and weeks. The only way to know for sure is to use a soil thermometer. They cost maybe $10. Stick it in the ground about 2 inches deep, first thing in the morning before the sun has had a chance to warm the surface. If it reads below 60, wait. If you absolutely cannot wait and you want to push the season a little bit, you can warm the soil by laying black plastic over the bed for a week or 2 before planting. The dark color absorbs heat and warms the soil underneath. But honestly, the best advice I can give you is just be patient. Beans grow fast once the soil is warm. A bean seed planted in warm soil in late May will catch up to and often surpass a bean seed planted in cold soil in early May, because the warm soil seed will germinate in a few days and grow vigorously from the start, while the cold soil seed will sit there struggling or rot entirely. You lose nothing by waiting, and you risk everything by rushing. Patience is not just a virtue in gardening, it is a yield multiplier. So those are the 5 mistakes. Overfeeding your soil with nitrogen and telling your beans they don't need to fix their own. Watering the leaves and inviting every fungus in the county to move in. Crowding your plants until they can't breathe and can't produce. Letting pods mature on the plant and shutting down your harvest weeks early. And planting in cold soil and watching your seeds rot before they ever had a chance. Every single one of these is simple. Every single one of them costs nothing to fix. And every single one of them, on its own, can cut your bean harvest in half without you ever knowing why. You can do 4 things right and 1 thing wrong and still end up disappointed. Here is what I want you to do. Think about your own bean growing experience. Think about what your plants looked like last year or the year before. Did the leaves get spotty and yellow in midsummer? You are probably watering the leaves. Did the plants grow tall and lush and then drop their flowers without making many pods? Too much nitrogen. Did you get a few good harvests and then the plants just stopped? You let a pod mature. Were the beans tough and stringy even when they looked fine? You waited too long to pick. Did some of your seeds never even come up? Cold soil. I have made every single one of these mistakes, most of them for multiple years in a row, because nobody ever pulled me aside and explained what I was doing wrong. I had to figure it out through trial and error, through reading old gardening books from the library, through conversations with people like Mrs. Chen, who had been doing it right for decades and didn't even realize they were holding onto knowledge that was being lost. And that is the thing that really gets me. This is not new information. Farmers and gardeners have known how to grow beans successfully for thousands of years. Beans were one of the 3 sisters crops that indigenous peoples across the Americas grew together, corn and beans and squash in the same mound. And that system worked so well that it sustained entire civilizations. The corn provided a trellis for the beans. The beans fed nitrogen to the corn and the squash. The squash shaded the soil and kept it cool and moist. It was a perfect, self-sustaining system that required no fertilizer, no fungicide, no inputs at all except the seeds themselves. They knew not to overfeed the soil because the beans fed the corn. They knew to give the plants space. They knew to harvest at the right time. This knowledge existed, and it was passed down, and somewhere along the way, in the rush to sell fertilizers and fungicides and gadgets and products, the simple, free knowledge got buried. It got replaced by instructions on the back of a seed packet that tell you just enough to get the seeds in the ground, and not nearly enough to get a real harvest out of them. I'm not saying the seed companies are doing anything malicious. They are selling seeds, not gardening wisdom. They want the seeds to germinate so you don't ask for a refund. They are not in the business of teaching you how to grow a bumper crop. But the result is the same. Millions of gardeners, every spring, putting bean seeds in the ground with high hopes and ending up disappointed, thinking they have a black thumb when really they just never got the full picture. And that is why I am telling you all of this. Not because it is complicated, but because it is simple, and simple things get lost. So here is what you do now. If you have a garden, or even just a few pots on a balcony, go try this. Get some bean seeds, some inoculant if you want to give them a boost, and find a spot with decent sun. Do not add nitrogen. Prepare a bed that is just average soil, nothing fancy. Wait until the soil is warm, at least 60 degrees, measured with a thermometer, not guessed at. Plant the seeds 4 inches apart for bush beans, 6 for pole beans, and put a trellis behind the pole beans if you are growing them. Water the soil at the base of the plants in the morning, not the leaves in the evening. And when the pods appear, pick them early, pick them often, and do not let a single one mature on the plant until you are ready for the season to end. Do all of that, and I promise you, hand on heart, you will harvest more beans than you ever have before. Not because you bought anything expensive, not because you worked harder, but because you stopped making the 5 mistakes that were holding you back. And once you see it work, once you walk out to your garden and pick a basket of tender, perfect beans from plants that are healthy and productive and still flowering weeks after your neighbor's beans have given up, I want you to do one more thing. Tell someone. Tell your neighbor. Tell your friend who is just starting a garden. Tell the person at the community garden plot who looks frustrated with their spindly little plants. Pass it on. That is how this knowledge survives. Not through products, not through advertising, but through gardeners sharing what actually works. If this video helped you, if it saved you from making the same mistakes I made for years, hit that like button so more gardeners can find it. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of practical, no-nonsense gardening advice. And leave a comment telling me about your bean growing experience, good or bad. I read every single one, and I would love to hear what worked for you and what didn't. Now go plant some beans. The soil is warming up, and you have got a harvest to grow.